a little bit, but not much, and that is domestic inflation. And domestic inflation is largely predicated by wage. So we need more data. We need to understand better what happens there. And why is domestic inflation resisting? To understand that, we need a category of things. Number one, we need wage data. And that is going to be measured in multiple ways. We have really as wide an area of indicators for that. The wage tracker, the number of job offers, the vacancies, the turnaround, plenty of them. And that, of course, determines how tight is the market, and therefore how wage will behave in the next few months. And when we look at the data that we have now, it is not declining. Compensation per employee has declined from Q3 to Q2. That's true. But the other indicators, no. So we need to have a lot more data in that regard. And the second element, which is critical, given the way we have constructed our projections, the way staff has constructed projections, we need more information about profit unit as well. Because our projection is predicated on the assumption that a lot of the catch-up wage growth will actually be absorbed in the markup of enterprises and corporates. So we need to have these two on a more sustainable basis, demonstrating that domestic inflation too is going to head down towards our target. We don't have that yet. We will have a lot more data in the course of 24. It will be particularly rich in the first half, but we will need that in order to determine whether it is actually sustainable or not. Now, you had a second question, which had to do with PEP. Let me just tell you how I regard the decision that we made on PEP, and that was shared by a very, very large majority of the governors. Everybody was fine with stopping the reinvestment at the end of 24. Some would have liked a slightly different tapering, starting a little earlier, starting later. So we ended up with that 100% reimbursement until the end of June, 50% reinvestment from July until the end of December, no reinvestment from January onward. This is really balance sheet normalization. It's a good moment to do that. We have little by way of fragmentation. Markets have absorbed our decline in APP reinvestment as we had done it in a very similar fashion. So we think that it's really really on a standalone basis, and it will continue to operate on the back burner, if you will, without, we hope, being significant. And that's how we came to that decision. But it's totally unrelated to, oh, if they do that with PEP, then maybe they're planning on this on rates. No. Rates are the primary tool, and we're going to use that independently of what happens on the PEP side, which, as I said, is on the back burner.
Thank you, President Lagarde. And the next question goes to Balazs Korani of Reuters. Balazs, please.
Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my questions. First question relates to the discussion. Last night, Jay Powell said that in their discussion, rate cuts have started to come into view and were definitely a part of the discussion. The question I have is the same true for the ECB? Was there any discussion from anybody about rate cuts at some point and how it could be done? The second question is related to what you said a few weeks ago. You said you don't expect rate change for a couple of quarters ahead. Today, do you maintain that view, or do you think data since then has evolved to a point where you would no longer keep that view?
Thank you very much for your two questions. On the first one, it's very easy. We did not discuss rate cuts at all. No discussion, no debate on this issue. And I think everybody in the room takes the view that between hike and cut, there's a whole plateau, whole beach of hold. You know, it's like, I don't know, solid, liquid, gas. You don't go from solid to gas without going through the liquid phase. So this was just not discussed. I think going forward, we are going to continue to be data dependent. We are going to continue to determine meeting by meeting what we see on a totality of data. But obviously, given a certain resistance of domestic inflation and the risk of second round effect that we absolutely want to avoid, we're going to be very attentive to that category of data that I have just described.
Thank you, President Lagarde. Jana Rando from Bloomberg. Jana, please.
Good afternoon. I have to come back to the rate outlook. You mentioned that a lot of data will arrive in the course of the first half on how wages and inflation will develop, and by coincidence, PEP reinvestments will also slow right around that time. So I would be interested in your view on whether that seems like a reasonable point in time to change your view on what kind of policy path for interest rates is needed, and whether that would be a good moment to consider rate cuts. And the second question I have is on something you mentioned in your introductory statement. You said governments should rein in fiscal support, or otherwise monetary policy might need to be tighter. Do you have any particular country in mind with that? Thank you.
On your latter question, we don't have any particular country in mind. I think we have the principle in mind that the fiscal support, particularly the discretionary support that was granted to compensate for the high prices of energy, that should absolutely be withdrawn. When you look at how fast the price of energy has gone down, both on the oil and gas front, it's just totally unjustified and probably unjustifiable to continue to have those fiscal measures in place. But no identification of any particular country. I think we make the point in that same paragraph, if I just go back to it, that we strongly encourage the reduction of the sovereign debt, but I'm sure you will find that reference. Let's see. Anyway, we make the point that fiscal measures must be rolled back, that sovereign debt must be reduced, and we make another point, which, as you will have noted, because you're a regular of this monetary policy statement. We have changed the language on structural reforms, and we have done that because we perceive and we fear a level of procrastination in reaching agreement, in closing on some of the technical files which have been pending for way too long, and which would be critical in order to support the competitiveness of the euro area. You will see when we publish the data that competitiveness is really weakening, and whether it's capital market union, whether it's banking union, or the whole market union and free movement of goods and services, a lot of progress needs to be made, and that point was made very clearly. The Vice President is a very strong supporter of that, and there were many voices on the Governing Council to say, in the presence of Valdis Dombrovskis, who is working on those issues, that it has to happen. On your first question, You know, it is true that we will receive a lot of data in the first half of 24. So it will be data rich, particularly on the employment front. Just consider that there are about 50% of the employees that we cover under our wage tracker who will see their collective agreement renegotiated, a new terms of employment and possibly new wages will be agreed. And in the same vein, in the corporate world, whether it's for goods or services, terms and conditions, price lists are often revised also in the first few months of any calendar year. But it's not to say that this will be it. We will remain attentive to a whole host of data that will come in the course of 24. Thank you.
The next question goes to Martin Arnold of the Financial Times. Martin, please.
Thank you very much. I have two questions, President Lagarde. Firstly, if I could just ask you about comments that Fed Chair Jay Powell made yesterday evening. He said that there was the risk that they would hang on too long with rates at the current level. And he said they were very focused on not making that mistake of holding on too long at a high level. Do you share that concern? And secondly, if I could ask about market expectations and market pricing in a slightly different way. Do you think that the current market pricing, which is for the ECB to cut rates 6 times next year, starting from March, is that reasonable? Does that seem fair to you? Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. On your first question, you know, who wants to hang on for too long? But equally, what we are saying today on the basis of the forecast that we have produced by the Eurosystem staff, we don't think that it's time to lower our guard. And we believe that there is still work to be done, and that can very much take the form of holding. And I think in our monetary policy statement, we refer specifically to sentences that, you know, they don't have a particular magical virtue, but now, of course, I find the fiscal comment that I wanted to refer to. So essentially what we say, and we have said that before, and we are repeating that same sentence, we say, based on our current assessment, we consider that the key ECB interest rates are at level that, maintained for a sufficiently long duration, will make a substantial contribution to our goal. And we continue with, our future decisions will ensure that our policy rates will be set at sufficiently restrictive level for as long as necessary. If you combine that with our data dependency and the fact that we are not, you know, narrowing the focus or the focal of what we look at, but we know that some data and a combination of data and the mechanics between these two, wages and profit in particular, are going to play a significant role, and we will be particularly attentive to those. But there will be, you know, more data coming in. We will have another bank lending survey. We will have, you know, a corporate telephone survey coming in. We will take that into account to determine, you know, when we can lower the guard, for sure. But that's where we are at the moment. Now, your second question, of course, I'm not going to address it directly. I will simply say that we will be looking at our 3 criteria. We will be identifying whether, on the basis of staff forecast, on the basis of our measurements of underlying inflation, on the basis of our strong transmission of monetary policy, we are at this medium-term target that we have set for ourselves of reaching the 2% target at the end of our projection. We are probably a little bit more severe with ourselves, because the end of our projection, or the end of the projection horizon, would take us to 2026, where we have 1.9. We are going to probably look very carefully at the end of 25, and I think end of 25 we're at 2.1, and we arrive on a more sort of sliding basis to that 2.1%. That's what we are going to be doing, and you know, as I said, the projections that we have now is conditioned on the interest rate path that was embedded in market data before the cutoff date. That cutoff date was November 23rd.
Thank you, President Lagarde. And the next question goes to Isabella Bufacchi of Il Sole 24 Ore. Isabella, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. My first question is on some countries entering a recession and seeing the projections with growth picking up. But how much the risk of recession, of things getting worse, comes into your decisions today and on interest rates? And then on PEP, I have a question, because you said in the past that flexibility in PEP investments is the first line of defense against fragmentation risk. And you said before it's a good moment. This sounds big news, that fragmentation risk is not a worry. But can you say a bit more about this? Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me say that we do not have a recession in our baseline. And of course, I'm not looking at specific countries. I'm looking, and we are looking collectively at the euro area at large. Our mandate is not to cause a recession. Our mandate is to reach the medium-term target of 2%, which we've defined as price stability. And to do that, we know that we're going to have to continue with financing that will be triggered by the interest rates that we set. That financing will necessarily dampen demand. We are seeing it. So we take all the macroeconomic data and the whole situation into account, but we are driven by delivering on our mandate. So on PEP, first of all, don't forget that as long as we reinvest, so meaning 100% of redemption coming to maturity, as long as we reinvest, we still have that flexibility. It was one of the attributes of PEP. And that flexibility applies to the 100% reinvestment until the end of June, and then to 50% of the reinvestment until the end of the calendar year 24. We believe that PEP has served its purpose. It was intended for the pandemic. It was an emergency program. Despite stupid COVID that comes to hit you now and again, as it did hit me, pandemic is over. The WHO has declared so. The emergency is no longer around. And obviously, it's a normalization of the balance sheet that is welcome at a time when we don't see actually currently risk of fragmentation. But if there were such risks, we also have tools that are available that we would not hesitate to use for a second. Because proper transmission is actually part of the mission.
Thank you, President Lagarde. And the last question today goes to Kolja Rozio with Die Zeit on digitally. So Kolja, please turn on your microphone and your question, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to ask my two questions. First question is, the German government has just passed some kind of savings package that includes a higher carbon tax, for example. And to what extent will this affect inflation in the Eurozone? And the second question is, if I understood you right, the main driver for the relatively stubborn inflation in the coming month will be wages and profits. Does this mean that there's still some risk, some kind of risk for, some kind of wage price spiral, or is it something else? Thank you.
Thank you very much. On your first question, it's obviously premature. The German coalition announced decision came yesterday. We have not figured those numbers and their forecast into our current projection. And obviously we will do so, and we will try to understand exactly what impact it would have. Germany is a big country. It represents roughly 25% of the euro area, and fiscal measures that would be taken, need to be accounted for, and their impact on inflation determined. So we will do that. Thank you for finishing with the wage and profit question, because it's something that staff, both here at the ECB but also in the National Central Bank, looks at very, very carefully. And what we have seen is a contribution from profit unit to inflation declining over the course of 23. On memories, the contribution was about 2.4, and it's now down to 1.4%. If that is confirmed, but it's a big if, and we need to really understand and make sure that this is sustainable. But if that is confirmed, it would mean that the hypotheticals that we had in our previous forecast and that we have for this forecast in December, which was that markups would be reduced in order to absorb increased wages by way of catch-up or otherwise, that is actually taking place, which would be really good news for inflation purposes. But we don't have enough on the table to really determine that this is what is going to happen. We will. Thank you very much. And if that was the last question, let me just wish all of you happy holidays, be safe, look after yourself and your families, stay warm, and be happy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next press conference is on January 25 next year. Until then, all the best. Thank you.